Last week was a memorable and joyous occasion for Fulbright scholar Joseph Holloway, who became the first Kanak to graduate from Harvard when he received his law diploma. The young lawyer proudly hails from Siloam, New Caledonia, as well as the villages of Lufi Lufi and Whangamalo in Samoa. He's no stranger to Pacific waves. It was almost a year ago when he spoke with RNZ Pacific on his Fulbright Award that enabled him to study at Harvard Law School, which is among the most top law schools in the world. Joseph says he hopes his success will inspire other young Kanaks to empower their communities and demarginalise the native Kanak people in New Caledonia. Speaking to Whenau Whenua, Joseph shared what it means to be a Harvard graduate and his views on the issue of self-determination in New Caledonia.
You're the first Kanak to graduate from Harvard University, and during your graduation ceremony last week, you proudly displayed the Kanak flag as you received your degree. Could you describe that moment? What was it like? How significant is this?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And my honest answer is when I'm up there and I hold the flag, I really feel like, it kind of feels like it's a win for all Kanak people. Despite a lot of the things that my people have gone through because of colonization, despite how we're still treated today in our own country, it felt so proud to showcase to the world how much we can achieve. It really felt like I was able to do that for all of us. It felt like I was really carrying all of my family there with me.
You're very passionate about the independence movement.
That's great.
Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I think, like any contentious issue that affects the freedoms and the liberties of people, there are always really strong opinions, and a lot of them are really based on your own lived experiences. So, of course, being an Indigenous Kanak, coming from a family who have always been pro-independence, has really shaped the way that I see my identity as a Kanak. It's shaped the way that I see a possible future for Kanak people within New Caledonia. And I can remember, being as young as 13, 14 years old, and my father telling me about the particular independence struggles throughout the 1980s in New Caledonia, things like the Uver hostage crisis, the Accords, and how they've been applied, and how this idea of like a neo-colonial territory existing in a world where we're trying to allow for nations and states to have their own independence, I think was always something that I found quite disconcerting. I found it really strange that a country like France would talk about equality and liberty and freedom for all, but wouldn't guarantee that to a nation like New Caledonia, where they can see for themselves the effects of colonization on an indigenous group, was really hard for me to stomach, even just from an objective perspective, before I even think about the effects of colonization and how I see it firsthand and what it looks like for other Kanaks. It's pretty clear that colonization has really disenfranchised a lot of our people, but I think in many ways, young Kanaks like me are trying to change the narrative, to effectively try and reverse years and years of colonial rule and policy guidelines and directions that have really left us in a pretty poor state. We were the ones who have always been the worst affected by health, by education, by COVID when it hit our country. On one hand, the French government talk about freedom, equality, and all these rights, but they don't guarantee them to people who effectively inherently deserve those rights as well.
Harvard, was it very intimidating? Was it very difficult? What was it like, the lifestyle, the study?
The way I would describe Harvard is that it's a place, particularly the law school, where it feels like there's a lot of opportunity. There are people who are doing things and thinking about ideas that I would have never thought of myself, or I didn't know existed before. There are academics and lawyers who are really doing their best to push the bell curve and move the law in certain ways in all different kinds of areas of law. So that was quite inspiring to see. It's also a place where it can feel very overwhelming, and I did feel overwhelmed at times. I did feel like sometimes you kind of lose yourself in being in a place like Harvard, because it's a real bubble. It's a place where you meet some really amazing people. I met some amazing First Nations people to really connect with a lot of not just Indigenous communities, but also Black communities. That was really special to be a part of. But ultimately, it can be hard, it can be difficult. There are things you're having to learn that are brand new, but there was some great people that I met that were really supportive, and it was an amazing experience.
Just hearing you talk about meeting First Nations people, was there like a sense of solidarity or something like that?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's what made the experience really memorable. It was just knowing that when you meet other people, other First Nation people, when you meet people from African Americans or Blacks or people who are part of the African diaspora, there really is a sense of commonality and shared struggles and ways. And a lot of them, they were the first or one of the few people in their families to go to university. For a lot of them, they experienced racism and disenfranchisement. They saw it happen to their own families and their own communities. And for a lot of them, that's why they went to Harvard, because they knew that it was a vehicle to allow them to change not only the lives of their families, but the lives of their communities as well. It was great to hear about the struggles of First Nation peoples on their lands, and there was an interesting Supreme Court case happening at the time regarding the adoption of Indigenous children. It was really interesting to see how Indigenous people at Harvard thought about how the case got to the Supreme Court, thought about the question that Supreme Court justices were asking about the case and what they ultimately thought would happen. So I think that was one of those really surreal moments where you see something in the news and you're with people who understand it intimately and deeply, and you sort of share that journey with